Hi, my name is Brianna. I'm 34, and I've always thought I had a pretty normal life. Married for 8 years, 2 kids, a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My sister, Emily, lives just 15 minutes away, and we've always been close, or at least I thought we were. But that day, everything shifted in a single frozen moment. I stopped by Emily's house on a regular Thursday afternoon, only to see my husband's car parked in her driveway. My chest tightened instantly. Something felt off. Something that would change my life forever. Before I even knocked, curiosity and fear made me pause. I looked through the living room window, and what I saw, I still can't forget. Before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, shocking betrayals, and emotional courage. I pulled my car into the familiar cul-de-sac, the wheels crunching softly over the thin layer of gravel scattered on the pavement. The sun was hanging low in the sky, a dull orange casting long shadows across the suburban street. Everything seemed ordinary. Lawns trimmed, mailboxes standing straight, kids' bicycles scattered across driveways. But then my eyes caught a sight that made my stomach plummet. A sleek black sedan parked crookedly in Emily's driveway. My husband's car. The one he drove every morning to work. The one he had promised me last week he'd take in for its routine service. I froze in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, feeling my heartbeat thump audibly in my ears. My mind raced, cycling through possible explanations. Maybe Emily had borrowed it for something. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it had nothing to do with me. Yet something about the way it was parked, angled toward the garage, door slightly open, made my instincts scream that something wasn't right. I stepped out of the car, my shoes crunching against the gravel. I tried to calm myself by taking slow breaths, but each inhalation felt like I was sucking in a storm. I walked slowly toward the house, my eyes fixed on the living room window. Curtains drawn slightly to one side, a sliver of the interior glowing under the afternoon sunlight. I paused, my hand resting lightly on the window frame, peeking through just enough to see. And then I saw them. My husband, standing unnaturally close to Emily, speaking softly with an intensity one had never witnessed before. His hand rested on her shoulder, not in a gentle or loving manner, but in a way that suggested urgency, pressure, secrecy. Emily's head tilted slightly, her lips moving as if she was explaining something important, something delicate. Their faces were almost too close, yet there was no warmth, no laughter, no affection like I had hoped. Instead, tension hung in the air like thick smoke. My heart dropped. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating. I wanted to call out, to demand answers, but my body froze. Fear, disbelief, and betrayal collided in a storm I wasn't prepared for. How long had this been happening? What could they possibly be discussing? My mind jumped to every scenario, every worst-case possibility. As I watched, I noticed subtle details that made the moment even more surreal. Emily kept glancing at the window, as if she knew I might be there. Her hands fidgeted nervously with a piece of paper I couldn't see clearly. My husband's eyes darted around, scanning the room, scanning the street, scanning me. I was sure of it, but I remained hidden, trembling behind the fence, praying they didn't notice me. I leaned in closer, careful not to make a sound. The gravel under my shoes threatened to betray my position with every step, but I couldn't pull away. My eyes darted to the coffee table inside the living room. A stack of papers lay there, some folded, some scattered, like someone had been rifling through them in a rush. My stomach churned. My thoughts kept repeating, what are they doing? What are they planning? How could this be happening? And then came the moment that almost broke me. My husband leaned forward, lowering his voice, and whispered something to Emily. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but the tone, the weight behind them, sent a chill down my spine. Emily's eyes widened slightly, her hands tightening around the papers. Whatever he had said, it was serious. My mind tried to fill in the blanks, but every possibility seemed worse than the last. I pressed my forehead gently against the cool glass, trying to steady my breathing. The reflection of the late afternoon sun shimmered across the window, almost like a veil over the reality I was seeing. I kept thinking about our life, our home, our routines, the trust one had placed in him for years, and it all felt like it was unraveling in front of me, silently, without any warning. Then, unexpectedly, a car drove slowly past the street. I jumped back instinctively, my heartbeat accelerating, my mind spinning. My husband flinched slightly, glancing toward the window, and Emily stiffened. They both seemed aware, even subtly, that someone could be watching. I ducked behind a bush, my breath shallow and rapid, every nerve screaming at me to flee. But curiosity, anger, and fear kept me rooted. I couldn't stop myself from observing, from noticing every small detail. My husband pulled a folded envelope from his pocket and handed it to Emily. Her eyes went wide as she took it, and she immediately tucked it into her sweater pocket. Whatever was in that envelope mattered. Whatever he had brought, or whatever instructions he had given, wasn't something meant for me, or anyone else. My pulse pounded as I tried to interpret what it could be. Time seemed to slow, stretching every second into an eternity. I watched Emily walk toward the kitchen, papers clutched in one hand, the envelope in the other. My husband remained by the living room, glancing out the window occasionally, clearly unsettled. Every movement felt charged with tension, every glance a potential revelation. I wanted to scream, to storm inside, to demand answers, but fear anchored me in place. As I crouched behind the bush, I remembered our previous arguments, small disagreements about money, minor lies he had told that I had brushed aside. None of them had prepared me for this. Seeing him here, outside the sanctuary of our home, involved in something secretive with my sister, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. My mind raced. Was Emily involved willingly? Was she being coerced? Was this about something I had no knowledge of? The more I observed, the more I noticed subtle emotional cues I had never seen before. Emily's eyes glistened slightly, her body tense, shoulders pulled back. She wasn't relaxed, wasn't at ease. She seemed trapped. My husband, in contrast, carried a mixture of authority and anxiety. His face was unreadable in the half-light, but I could tell he was intent on controlling the situation, steering it in a direction I wasn't part of. I took a step back, heart hammering, and my mind wandered to my children. They were at home, playing quietly in the living room, unaware that their father, or so I thought, was tangled in some secret here at my sister's house. A cold wave of realization hit me. My entire perception of our family, of our life together, was being questioned in an instant. I crouched a little lower, pressing my hands against the cool metal fence, as if the act itself could make me invisible. My eyes followed every tiny movement, every gesture. My husband pulled a chair closer to the window, then sat down, leaning forward. Emily remained standing, hands still clutching the papers, an envelope. Their conversation resumed in murmurs, but I caught occasional words, numbers, names, references that made no sense yet felt ominously important. Suddenly, a neighbor's dog barked loudly across the street. I jumped, my body tensing as my husband's head snapped in the direction of the sound. Emily looked startled too, glancing around nervously. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, realizing that any sudden movement, any audible sound, could blow my cover. The tension felt unbearable, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that one wrong step could shatter everything. Time became almost meaningless. Minutes felt like hours as I continued to watch, piecing together subtle clues. The envelope, the papers, the secrecy, they all pointed to something far more serious than I could have guessed. I could feel the anger simmering beneath the fear. My hands were cold, fingers trembling, but a part of me wanted to confront them immediately. Another part whispered to wait, to observe, to collect my thoughts before doing something I might regret. And then it happened. Emily took a deep breath, glanced toward the window where I was hidden, and whispered something almost inaudible to my husband. His head snapped up, eyes scanning the window again, but he didn't see me. My heart leapt into my throat. Whatever she said, whatever reaction it provoked, it was significant enough to make him tense visibly, leaning back in the chair, rubbing his face with one hand. I realized then that I had become an invisible witness to a world I had never known existed, one where secrets, pressures, and hidden motives collided right in front of me. The shock was raw, visceral, and electrifying. My mind raced, oscillating between disbelief, anger, and a desperate need to understand. I knew this moment would define everything that came next. Even now, as I crouch behind the fence, the weight of that discovery presses on me. My husband's car, parked so innocently outside my sister's house, had become the first visible symbol of betrayal, secrecy, and tension. Every small gesture, every whisper, every exchanged paper was a puzzle I had yet to solve, but one thing was painfully clear: nothing would ever be the same again. I backed away from the fence slowly, my legs trembling like I had just run a marathon, though I had only been crouched there a few minutes. My mind was racing, a relentless storm of questions that had no answers. The sunlight outside was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across Emily's front yard, making the black sedan look even more ominous. I realized then that hiding behind bushes and watching was no longer enough. I needed to understand what was happening inside that living room. Not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. I walked back to my car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I started the engine and drove a few blocks down the street, just enough to be out of sight, but still within earshot. My heart pounded in sync with the rhythm of the car, every engine vibration echoing my anxiety. I could still see my husband through the partially drawn curtains whenever I glanced back. The thought that he was discussing something behind my back, something deeply personal or financial, gnawed at me like a living thing. When I reached my driveway at home, I felt an urgency that wouldn't let me stop. My children were quietly playing in the living room, blissfully unaware of the storm that had suddenly invaded my life. I quietly closed the car door and tiptoed into the house, my ears straining for any sound that might break the tense silence. I told myself I needed to think clearly, to gather whatever clues I could before confronting them. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I opened the drawer where we kept important papers and started sifting through them, trying to find something that might explain why my husband was at Emily's house. At first, everything seemed normal: bills, insurance documents, letters from the school. But then I noticed something odd, a small envelope tucked behind the stack of recent statements. My name was written on it, in handwriting I didn't recognize. Curious, I carefully opened it. Inside was a letter, dated just a few days ago, filled with detailed instructions about transferring funds and managing accounts. At the bottom, in bold, unmistakable handwriting, was my signature, or what appeared to be it. My stomach turned cold. I sank into the chair, gripping the edges of the table to steady myself. My mind screamed, "This isn't possible. He couldn't have, could he?" The thought that my husband could have forged my signature was unbearable, yet the evidence stared back at me, undeniable. The words on the paper were specific, almost too precise, outlining how to divert funds from our joint accounts to another account I had never heard of. My heart pounded. so hard I feared it might burst through my chest. I took a deep breath and tried to recall recent conversations, minor arguments, even casual mentions of money. Nothing matched what I was seeing. The realization hit me like a punch. This wasn't about a late-night errand or borrowed papers. This was deliberate. My husband had been planning something behind my back, and judging by the details in this letter, it had been in motion for some time. I decided to investigate further, pulling out the filing cabinet where we kept older statements and bills. The more I looked, the more discrepancies I found. Withdrawals I didn't authorize, transfers with unfamiliar reference numbers, and receipts from places I had never been. The evidence was mounting, and every new detail twisted the knife in my chest. My safe, familiar life was crumbling piece by piece. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily, sent just minutes ago. "Brianna, can we talk? I'm worried." My pulse jumped. Why now? Was she feeling guilty? Or was this another piece of the puzzle I wasn't yet ready to understand? I stared at the screen, debating whether to reply immediately or wait. My instincts screamed at me not to reply too soon, not to show panic. Yet another part of me wanted to call her, demand answers, and tear the veil off the secrecy I had only glimpsed moments before. I decided to call my closest friend, someone I trusted implicitly. Her name was Karen, and she had a knack for seeing through complex situations. I explained the situation as best as I could without revealing everything, my voice shaking, words tumbling out in fragments. "I saw him at Emily's. I don't know what he's doing. There's this envelope." I found this letter. I paused, fighting to control my panic. Karen's voice was calm but firm, a stark contrast to my own racing thoughts. "Brianna, you need to slow down. Listen to me. Take pictures, keep everything. Document everything. This could be serious. This isn't just a misunderstanding." Her words, though steady, fueled a new level of urgency inside me. I wasn't imagining things. There was a deliberate, calculated plan here, and I was the one who had to unravel it before it was too late. I spent the next hour meticulously going through every paper in the house, creating a mental map of accounts, transactions, and letters. Each discovery added a layer of betrayal I hadn't expected. I realized that the letter in the envelope wasn't the only one. There were subtle, minor transactions over the past few months, withdrawals that seemed small individually, but were part of a larger scheme to shift significant funds without my knowledge. The weight of betrayal wasn't just financial. It was emotional, visceral. I kept thinking about the life I had trusted, the love I had believed in, the years I had invested in a marriage that suddenly felt like a house of cards. Every memory of shared laughter, quiet evenings, and casual conversations now seemed tainted. My husband's face, once familiar and comforting, replayed in my mind with a hint of deception I could no longer ignore. By mid-evening, I was exhausted but relentless. I pulled up our online banking history, cross-referencing every transaction with the paper records I had found. Patterns emerged, clear as day. Transfers timed around his visits to Emily's house, small withdrawals lining up with times I had been out or distracted, and notes that suggested coordination. My hands trembled as I scrolled, disbelief and anger coursing through me. I thought about confronting Emily immediately, but I hesitated. Something in her eyes when I had glimpsed her at the window told me she wasn't fully in control either. She looked nervous, pressured, even trapped. I realized that my husband might not be acting alone, or perhaps she had been drawn into his schemes, unwillingly or unknowingly. Either way, the complexity of it terrified me. Then I found a receipt, crumpled, tucked behind a folder, that made my blood run cold. It was for a safety deposit box rental in a nearby town, registered under my husband's name, but listing our address. Inside, he could be storing more documents, more evidence, anything to solidify his plan. The thought of him having a hidden stash of papers, possibly including forged legal documents, made my mind spin. I felt trapped in a nightmare I had never imagined possible. I sat back in my chair, running my fingers through my hair, trying to calm my racing thoughts. My home, my sanctuary, felt invaded, not physically, but emotionally, psychologically. I realized that what I had stumbled upon in Emily's living room window earlier was only a fragment of the bigger picture. That glimpse, that single moment, had opened a door to a labyrinth of betrayal I wasn't yet fully prepared to navigate. I decided to take a moment to breathe, to step outside into the crisp evening air. The sky was turning a deep shade of indigo, the first stars beginning to glimmer faintly. I inhaled, trying to ground myself, but the calm was fleeting. Every shadow outside seemed to remind me of the secrecy inside. Every whisper of wind a metaphor for the quiet, insidious deception that had been creeping through my life. As I paced the backyard, I recalled subtle signs I had previously ignored. The hurried phone calls he took in the bathroom, the vague excuses for disappearing on weekends, the unexplained late-night trips to the bank. They hadn't made sense at the time, but now the pieces were aligning with a chilling clarity. I had been blind, trusting, naive, and now I was painfully awake to reality. By the time night fully fell, I had gathered all the papers, receipts, and documents into a secure folder. I locked it in a drawer I knew he wouldn't think to check. My hands shook as I did it, but there was a strange, quiet satisfaction in securing evidence. For the first time since the shock at Emily's house, I felt a small flicker of control amidst the chaos. I sat at the table, looking at the collection of letters, bank statements, and receipts. Each one told a story of deception, planning, and betrayal. Yet, buried within that story, I realized was my own strength, my instinct to observe, to investigate, to gather truth before confronting them was a testament to my resilience. The discovery had been horrifying, yes, but it had also awakened a clarity, a determination I didn't know I possessed. As I closed the drawer and leaned back, my phone buzzed again. A notification from our bank, a flagged transaction. I stared at it, feeling a mix of dread and validation. Someone, perhaps the bank itself, had noticed irregular activity. My husband's careful planning was not as foolproof as he had believed. The realization brought a grim sense of relief. Evidence existed outside my control. There was a path forward. The night grew darker, the house silent except for the distant hum of traffic. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to that moment, at Emily's window, to the letter, to the web of deception that had been quietly spun around me. I knew the next steps would require courage, planning, and unshakable resolve. But for the first time, I felt the faintest spark of empowerment. I could confront this. I could reclaim my life. I could face the truth, no matter how painful, and survive it. The folder I had locked away on the kitchen counter felt heavier than it had when I first picked it up. Each paper inside was a fragment of a reality I hadn't wanted to face, yet now I knew that ignoring it would only let the storm grow stronger. My hands shook as I leaned over the table, flipping through every receipt, bank statement, and envelope once more, searching for patterns that might reveal the full extent of my husband's betrayal. I needed to understand the plan he had woven around me, the one he had started long before I saw him at Emily's house. The first thing that struck me was the meticulousness. Each transaction, each small withdrawal, had been timed and calculated. It wasn't a moment of impulsive greed. It was deliberate, thought out, and methodical. My husband had taken weeks, maybe months, to position every piece of this hidden puzzle so that I would remain unsuspecting. My chest tightened as I realized that for all these years, He had been living a double life, one in which I was blind and trusting, and one where he plotted quietly in the shadows. I pulled out a notebook and began mapping it all. I listed dates, times, and amounts, connecting them with lines, like some complex chart in a detective's office. It quickly became apparent that this wasn't just about money. Some transfers pointed to accounts that didn't match anything I recognized. Others referenced Emily's initials in ways that didn't make sense at first glance. A cold wave of fear ran down my spine. Were they working together on something I wasn't aware of? Was my sister complicit? Or had she been coerced into this by him? The thought made me physically recoil, but I forced myself to keep going, to analyze each detail. The deeper I delved, the clearer a disturbing pattern emerged. There were letters, handwritten notes, carefully folded, sometimes left in envelopes, sometimes tucked into folders. One caught my attention. It had instructions for Emily, not signed by my husband, but clearly intended for her eyes only. It outlined steps to handle a financial transfer that involved me indirectly, using my name as a shield. My stomach churned as I read the lines. Instructions like, ensure Brianna remains unaware, and do not mention details to her directly. It was calculated, manipulative, and cruel. I slammed the envelope down on the table, my mind spinning. The realization hit me harder than any betrayal I had imagined before. This wasn't just a husband's deception. It was a coordinated plan with layers of secrecy, pressure, and manipulation designed to keep me in the dark while my resources were siphoned away. My fingers trembled, but my thoughts sharpened. I needed evidence, proof, something tangible that I could hold on to before making any confrontations. I decided to go through every digital trace next. My husband's computer, normally password protected and tucked away in the home office, had recently been left unlocked after a minor system update. I slipped quietly into the office, closing the door behind me, and started searching through his files. Spreadsheets, PDFs, scanned documents. Everything was there, organized meticulously. Names, account numbers, dates, and subtle notes he had typed to himself. Every file was a window into the careful construction of a plan that aimed to remove me from awareness entirely. One folder stood out. It was labeled Emily. Inside were scanned receipts, letters, and emails between them. Some were innocuous enough at first glance, shopping lists, casual notes, but layered within were instructions about money transfers, account management, and even mentions of properties I had inherited from my parents. My hands shook as I scrolled. There was no ambiguity here. He had manipulated Emily into acting as a silent accomplice, even if she hadn't fully understood her role. A sudden knock at the door startled me, making my heart leap into my throat. My son, Caleb, had wandered in, his small feet padding softly across the hardwood floor. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked innocently, holding a toy car in one hand. I froze, forcing a smile, ruffling his hair. "Just working on some papers, sweetie," I murmured, my voice calm but my mind still racing. He nodded, satisfied, and left the room. My pulse remained rapid, but I was reminded of why I had to see this through, not just for myself, but for the children. I returned to the documents with renewed determination. There were small, seemingly insignificant actions that, when viewed together, revealed the depth of his plan. He had been setting up accounts under false names, redirecting small payments from our household bills to obscure sources, and even manipulating joint credit lines so that I wouldn't notice irregularities. Each discovery added a new layer of betrayal, but it also clarified the structure of his intentions. He hadn't acted randomly. He had designed a web with me at the center, blind to its threads. My hands were covered in ink smudges from the letters I had pulled from envelopes. I spread the documents across the table like a map, creating connections with lines of red pen. Names, dates, accounts. all converging toward one goal that was terrifyingly clear. I was being edged out of control of our shared finances, pushed into a corner while he orchestrated everything silently. I felt my pulse thumping so loudly I was sure he could hear it from another room, even though he wasn't home. The next revelation came when I discovered a series of email exchanges between him and an unfamiliar financial advisor. The emails were polite, professional, but underneath, the content suggested a collaboration in bypassing my authorization on several transfers. This wasn't just financial trickery. It was premeditated, strategic, and carried out with a level of precision that made my stomach twist in knots. My trust in him had been absolute, and now it had been weaponized against me. I paused for a moment, staring out the kitchen window at the fading light. The backyard was quiet, the shadows growing long. I remembered standing outside Emily's house earlier, watching him speak in whispers, feeling the cold grip of fear and disbelief. Now, seeing the scope of his plan laid bare before me, the same sensation returned, only magnified. This was more than a betrayal. It was a deliberate assault on my life, my security, my sense of reality. I needed to take action. First, I documented everything I had found digitally, taking screenshots of emails and scanning each handwritten note. I created a folder on a secure flash drive, hidden deep in a drawer he wouldn't think to check. Each piece of evidence was a shield, a way to protect myself from further manipulation. The process was painstaking, but it gave me a small sense of control in a situation where I had felt completely powerless. Then I remembered the receipt for the safety deposit box I had found earlier. It suddenly felt like the key to understanding the full extent of his plan. If he had hidden documents there, legal papers, financial statements, maybe even signed contracts, it could reveal the entirety of what he had been orchestrating. I made a mental note to investigate it immediately, knowing that time was of the essence if I wanted to stay ahead of him. As I continued sorting through the documents, a message from Emily appeared on my phone again. "Brianna, please, you have to hear me out." I stared at the screen, torn. On one hand, I wanted to confront her immediately. On the other, I realized that any interaction could tip off my husband or complicate matters further. I decided to reply cautiously, asking her to meet somewhere neutral, where we could speak privately without drawing attention. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, piecing together everything I had uncovered. The plan was intricate, insidious, and undeniably real. I remembered every quiet conversation, every unusual errand, every sudden trip he had taken in the past year. All of it was part of the puzzle, and now I could see the picture emerging. The betrayal cut deeper than any I had imagined, not because of affection lost, but because of the careful, deliberate manipulation that had been at play for so long. By early morning, I had devised a strategy. I would continue to gather evidence, track irregularities, and document every action. But I also realized that confronting them without preparation could be dangerous, not physically, but emotionally and legally. I needed a plan that would protect me, expose the truth, and prevent any further deception. For the first time, I felt the spark of resolve. I wasn't just uncovering his plan, I was preparing to dismantle it entirely. The discovery had changed everything. I no longer saw my husband as just a partner, my sister as just family. I saw them as players in a calculated game designed to manipulate and control me. The realization was terrifying, but within it lay clarity. I could anticipate their moves, understand their patterns, and arm myself with knowledge they couldn't take away. The hidden plan against me wasn't invisible anymore. I could see it piece by piece, and I was no longer defenseless. The night after mapping out my husband's plan, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking through every possible step. I knew confronting him immediately would be a mistake. His calm, calculated demeanor could easily turn a confrontation into denial, argument, or manipulation. I needed proof, undeniable evidence, before taking any action. The thought made my chest tighten, but a flicker of determination kept me focused. I wasn't just collecting documents. I was preparing myself for the moment when the truth would finally be undeniable, not just to me, but to anyone involved. Morning came slowly, dragging with it a weight of anxiety and purpose. I started with a careful survey of the house, retracing my husband's routines. Every detail mattered: the times he left, the errands he claimed were for work, the small habits that revealed his movements. I began documenting these quietly, noting timestamps, checking bank apps for notifications, and keeping mental tabs on phone patterns. Each observation felt like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle while standing in the dark. I had to be discreet. One slip could tip him off, and if he noticed that I was watching, the plan would become even more dangerous. I reminded myself to act naturally, carry on with chores, attend to the children, make small, ordinary gestures that would never hint at my investigations. Every day became a delicate balancing act. On the surface, I was Brianna, the wife and mother, calm and unassuming. Beneath that veneer, I was a detective, following clues, collecting evidence, and slowly untangling the web of secrecy. The first breakthrough came when I noticed discrepancies in his email habits. He had a private folder in his inbox I hadn't known about, used sparingly but with precision. It contained communications with the financial advisor I had discovered earlier, but also new threads I hadn't seen, appointments, confirmations, and subtle instructions regarding account transfers. I started taking screenshots, documenting every line, timestamp, and attachment. Each one added clarity to the strategy he had been executing, the hidden plan I had only glimpsed through Emily's window. Meanwhile, I needed to monitor Emily without raising suspicion. Our sisterly bond had always been close enough that casual visits or phone calls wouldn't draw attention. I texted her innocuous messages, asking about errands or her children, carefully gauging her responses. Her tone was guarded, yet there were hints of discomfort, even fear. It confirmed my suspicion that she wasn't acting entirely of her own volition. She was caught in his scheme, whether she admitted it or not. I needed her perspective, but had to earn her trust slowly. I also began reviewing household bills, utilities, and receipts in painstaking detail. My husband had been careful, but patterns emerged. Small discrepancies in electricity and water bills matched days he had supposedly been at work, but were likely spent elsewhere, orchestrating minor tasks for his plan. I logged each anomaly, noting times and locations. The act of methodically recording each piece of evidence, though exhausting, gave me a strange sense of control. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a strategy, not just panic. One evening, while my children were asleep, I returned to the documents I had collected. I discovered a series of sticky notes he had left in his study, seemingly mundane reminders. But when lined up with bank transfers and email timestamps, they revealed coded instructions, subtle cues meant to avoid suspicion but entirely comprehensible to him and anyone complicit. My heart raced as I realized the level of thought he had invested in this. Every word, every small action had been calculated to conceal his activities. Despite the tension, I couldn't isolate myself completely. I continued my usual routines: grocery shopping, school pickups, dinner preparations, using them as camouflage. I even allowed myself small moments with the children, letting them play in the yard while I observed from a distance, feeling the sting of betrayal while simultaneously ensuring my investigations remained undetected. Each mundane interaction became a cover, a way to maintain normalcy while collecting the truth piece by piece. A critical discovery came when I accessed the safety deposit box he had rented. I knew from the receipt that it was nearby, but visiting it required planning. I pretended to run errands in that part of town, casually slipping into the bank during a busy hour. Using a copy of the key I had obtained discreetly, I opened the box and found more documents, contracts, bank statements, and letters to Emily detailing instructions to secure assets in ways that excluded me. The evidence confirmed my worst fears. The plan was real, deliberate, and extensive. Holding the documents in my hands, I felt a mix of anger, fear, and vindication. He had attempted to erase my control over our finances, using Emily as a pawn while presenting a facade of normalcy to the outside world. Every line in those contracts was a blueprint of betrayal. I meticulously scanned each one, keeping digital copies for security, knowing that confrontation without such proof could backfire disastrously. Throughout this process, I also maintained subtle surveillance. I observed my husband's routines at home, noting his comings and goings, the times he accessed certain files or spoke privately with Emily. I avoided suspicion by asking him casual questions about errands or work, carefully framing my tone to appear normal. Every answer he gave was cross-referenced with my collected evidence. Inconsistencies emerged, minor lies that revealed his attention to detail, but also his overconfidence. One night, I overheard a conversation between him and Emily from the kitchen, where I had strategically placed myself as if tidying dishes. Their voices were low, but the words were clear enough to confirm that Emily was following instructions, albeit reluctantly. I could hear the tension in her voice, the hesitation that betrayed her discomfort. My heart ached for her, but I also knew that this hesitation was the key to unraveling the plan. If she could be persuaded or compelled to speak the truth, I would gain critical insight into the full scope of his actions. I decided to approach Emily gradually, using subtle empathy rather than confrontation. I invited her for casual outings with the children, emphasizing shared memories and trust. During these moments, I asked indirect questions about her recent activities, observing her reactions closely. Each pause, each glance, each carefully chosen word was a clue. She was nervous, guilty, conflicted, but also willing to share small fragments when she felt safe. Piece by piece, I gathered her perspective, aligning it with the documents and patterns I had already collected. At the same time, I continued to monitor online activity. Bank notifications, credit alerts, and even small e-receipts became tools for observation. Each signal was cross-referenced, mapped, and documented. It felt like a game of chess where I was both player and observer, always staying one step ahead, careful not to provoke him prematurely. I realized that the key to uncovering the truth lay in patience, in subtlety, in carefully orchestrated observation without tipping off the conspirators. Days passed, each one layered with tension. I had to maintain the facade of normalcy while following threads of evidence, meeting Emily in neutral settings, and piecing together digital and physical clues. I even began keeping a personal journal, writing down my thoughts, observations, and small breakthroughs. The act of writing made the chaos manageable, allowing me to process the emotional weight of betrayal while maintaining clarity. A turning point came when I intercepted an email draft my husband had accidentally left open on the family computer. It contained instructions for transferring funds that would have bypassed me entirely, including a timetable and contingency plans. My hands shook as I read it, realizing how close I had come to losing control completely. But the evidence in my hands now was undeniable. For the first time, I felt a tangible sense of power, knowledge, strategy, and preparation giving me the upper hand in a situation that had previously seemed hopeless. Through all this, I also observed patterns in my husband's behavior that hinted at overconfidence. He assumed I was unaware, that I trusted blindly. That assumption became my advantage. By acting normal, maintaining routines, and strategically gathering proof, I slowly dismantled the illusion he had built. I was not reacting impulsively. I was collecting the truth meticulously, ensuring that when the time came to confront him, the evidence would be indisputable and the consequences unavoidable. In the evenings, I would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by documents, receipts, and notes, sipping tea while reflecting on the progress I had made. I realized that collecting the truth was not just about proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming my agency, restoring my control over my life, and preparing to make choices unclouded by fear or manipulation. Every new discovery strengthened my resolve and sharpened my focus. By the end of that week, I had compiled an overwhelming body of evidence: bank records, emails, letters, contracts, receipts, and Emily's accounts of her interactions with him all converged into a cohesive story, one that was undeniable, logical, and actionable. I had not confronted him. Not yet, but I had prepared for the moment when the truth could no longer be hidden. Patience had become my ally, strategy my shield, and clarity my weapon. The morning air felt sharper than usual, crisp with the kind of clarity that only comes before a storm breaks. I woke before the children, my heart racing with a mix of anxiety, anticipation, and determination. Today was the day I would no longer let my life be controlled by lies, deception, and manipulation. Every document, every email, every conversation I had secretly collected over the past week had prepared me for this moment. I had rehearsed my steps over and over in my mind, but in reality, nothing could completely prepare me for the intensity of what was about to happen. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake Caleb or Lily. The stack of evidence rested on the kitchen counter, neatly organized, a tangible representation of my months of vigilance and sleepless nights. Each sheet of paper felt heavier than the last, yet empowering. I had proof, indisputable proof, of my husband's calculated betrayal. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of calm amid the storm raging inside me. My hands trembled, but it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. After preparing a simple breakfast for the children, I watched them eat with innocence that both warmed and broke my heart. I had been so consumed with uncovering the truth that I had almost forgotten their presence in my life. Today, however, I realized that exposing the betrayal wasn't just about me. It was about creating a life of honesty, safety, and stability for them. Their laughter, their trust in me, became the fuel that strengthened my resolve. I waited until my husband had left for work, following his usual morning routine, which I had memorized through careful observation. He didn't suspect a thing. To him, I was still the unsuspecting, ordinary Brianna. I took one last deep breath, steeling myself, and drove to the bank first, where I had arranged a private meeting with the branch manager. I had explained that there were discrepancies in our joint accounts that needed immediate attention, and they had agreed to review everything confidentially. Today, every document I had gathered would finally be scrutinized by professionals who could validate the truth. As I entered the bank, I felt a nervous excitement. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee, ordinary and comforting, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing inside me. I presented the documents to the manager, explaining my concerns clearly and calmly, step by step. Every spreadsheet, receipt, and email I had collected was laid out in front of them. Their expressions shifted from casual curiosity to focused attention, their brows furrowing as they reviewed the evidence. "It's all here," I said softly, almost to myself, "everything he's been trying to hide." The manager nodded gravely, taking notes and confirming that my suspicions were accurate. The validation hit me harder than I expected. My husband's intricate plan, the months of hidden transactions, and the involvement of Emily were all undeniable. I felt a surge of both vindication and sorrow. The betrayal had been real, and now it was exposed in the light of reason and authority. Leaving the bank, I decided it was time to involve Emily. I called her and asked her to meet at a nearby cafe, a neutral space where we could speak freely. When she arrived, her face was pale, eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. She slid into the booth across from me, hands clutching her purse tightly. "Brianna, I didn't know how to tell you," she began, voice trembling. "I didn't want to be involved, but I felt trapped. He made it so complicated I couldn't refuse." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "It's okay," I said gently, my voice firm but compassionate. "I know you were pressured, but now we can fix this together." Her shoulders sagged, and a small, grateful smile appeared. I realized that confronting the truth wasn't about anger alone. It was about reclaiming agency, forgiveness where deserved, and ensuring that manipulation no longer had a place in our lives. Next, I returned home, preparing for the confrontation with my husband. I had arranged a private meeting in our living room, ensuring the children were at school, so the moment would be entirely ours. When he walked in, cheerful and unsuspecting, I could feel the weight of the evidence behind me, the culmination of my patient investigations lending me strength. I waited until he had set his coffee down. Before speaking, my voice steady and unwavering. "We need to talk," I said. He looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. "About what?" he asked casually, a hint of a smirk that immediately vanished when he saw the determination in my eyes. I didn't hesitate. I laid out the documents, emails, receipts, and notes, piece by piece. Each line, each timestamp, each hidden account and letter was presented without embellishment, without accusation, simply the undeniable truth. At first, he tried to dismiss it, to charm his way out of accountability. But as I calmly walked him through every piece of evidence, I could see the tension building, his smirk fading into silence. The realization hit him. The meticulous plan he had counted on to remain hidden had been entirely uncovered. I maintained composure, my voice controlled, my gaze firm. "This ends today," I said. "No more lies, no more secrets. Everything is out in the open." He sat down, defeated and quiet. For the first time in years, he had no words to manipulate, no excuses to offer. I realized then that the power dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer the unsuspecting partner. I was the orchestrator of truth, the guardian of evidence, the force ensuring that betrayal could no longer continue unchecked. After the confrontation, I made a list of immediate steps: legal consultation, financial safeguards, and conversations with our children to explain changes in a sensitive and age-appropriate way. Each action was deliberate, precise, and empowering. I wasn't just reacting. I was shaping a future built on honesty, security, and resilience. The sense of liberation was overwhelming. Months of anxiety, secrecy, and betrayal were finally met with clarity, agency, and actionable steps. The weeks that followed were intense but transformative. I worked with lawyers to secure our finances, close compromised accounts, and establish independent control over critical assets. Emily and I coordinated on shared responsibilities, ensuring that her involvement in past actions did not translate into long-term consequences for either of us. Each document I had meticulously collected became a tool, a shield, a statement of empowerment. During this time, I also focused on emotional healing. Counseling sessions, long walks, journaling, and moments of reflection allowed me to process anger, sadness, and fear. I learned to trust my instincts again, to rebuild my sense of self, and to recognize the strength I had developed through adversity. Every small victory, closing an account, confirming a secure transaction, receiving reassurance from Emily, felt like a step into a new life I had carved for myself. One afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting with the financial advisor, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching sunlight filter through the trees in our backyard. Caleb and Lily played nearby, their laughter light and carefree. I smiled, realizing how far we had come. The betrayal, while devastating, had led me to a place of strength, clarity, and resilience I had never imagined possible. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer controlled me. Finally, I made a conscious decision to reclaim joy in everyday life. Simple things: a walk in the park, cooking meals with the children, reconnecting with friends, even small acts of self-care became symbols of my renewed independence. I had exposed the deception, confronted the manipulation, and emerged stronger, more self-aware, and ready to embrace a future defined by my own choices. The day I exposed everything was not just the end of a painful chapter. It was the beginning of a new life, one built on trust in myself, careful vigilance, and the courage to face truth head-on. I had faced betrayal, unmasked a calculated plan, and reclaimed control over my life and my family. In that moment, I understood that resilience is not born from comfort, but from the ability to confront reality, gather strength, and act decisively. Even as the dust settled from the chaos of betrayal and deception, I realized that exposing the truth had been only the first step toward reclaiming my life. The aftermath was not neat or simple. It was a process of rebuilding, piece by piece, of finding a rhythm in a world that had once seemed familiar but was forever altered. I had confronted my husband, unmasked the hidden plans, and carefully unraveled the manipulations that had threatened to control my every choice. Yet, the true transformation was not in the confrontation itself, but in what I discovered about myself along the way. I discovered resilience I didn't know I possessed, clarity of judgment sharpened by necessity, and an unwavering determination to protect not just my own future, but that of my children. Caleb and Lily became the center of my focus, their laughter and innocence reminding me that life moves forward even when hearts are heavy. I found that strength comes in quiet moments as much as in decisive action, in organizing documents at the kitchen table, in taking careful observations without drawing attention, and in the courage to reach out to Emily without anger, but with empathy. These moments shaped the foundation of a new life that was entirely mine to define. I also realized that forgiveness, in its own way, was a form of power. Forgiving Emily did not mean condoning her participation, but it allowed us to work together without bitterness, to untangle the consequences of deception and rebuild trust where possible. Forgiving my husband, though more complicated, became a process of acknowledging reality without letting it dominate my emotions. I refused to let anger dictate my every thought, instead channeling it into purposeful action and thoughtful planning for the future. Each day, I reclaimed a little more of myself, my confidence, my sense of agency, my ability to make decisions unclouded by fear or manipulation. As the sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the room where I had once sifted through betrayal like a detective piecing together a puzzle, I understood that life had changed irrevocably, but for the first time, I felt a sense of freedom. The weight of uncertainty, of manipulation, and of hidden plans was finally lifted. I could make choices without hesitation, embrace opportunities without fear, and guide my children through a life built on honesty, trust, and resilience. My story was no longer defined by deceit or betrayal. It was defined by courage, strategic thinking, and the unwavering belief that I could rise above the shadows cast by others' actions. I am Brianna, and this is the life I have reclaimed, a life forged through patience, strength, and clarity. It is not perfect, nor is it free from challenges, but it is mine. Every document I collected, every observation I made, every calculated step I took led to this moment of empowerment. I have faced the worst, uncovered the hidden truths, and emerged stronger than I ever thought possible. The past no longer controls me. The future is open, full of possibility and waiting for the life I choose to create. And as I watch Caleb and Lily play in the yard, laughter spilling into the quiet afternoon, I know with certainty that the most important victories are not those over others, but the victories we claim over fear, doubt, and uncertainty. I have exposed everything, and in doing so, I have found myself. My life begins anew, grounded in truth, strength, and the courage to never allow deception to dictate my path again.